So good morning. Today is Purim. Today's Purim. That's what today is. And today's daf is daf Yud of Yevamot. And we are going to definitely need an introduction today. So let me share my screen, and we're going to go through what we've just done and maybe even mention in passing what we've done through the first 9 or 8 dapim of Maseches Yevamot. So yesterday we finally finished the discussion of the sources for the prohibition in the first Mishnah in Yevamot. All right. So as a result of doing that, we had said on Daf Gimel Amud Bet that the source was this Aleha Gzeira Shava. And we turned out that actually Rebbe has another source of Ukacha and the Ma. And so we came up with we provided those separate sources, explained how they deal with each other's psukim, and generally we've got to basically we've explained why we needed the sources in the first place. And so we're really set to move on. So having done that, we now turn to our list of 15 categories of erva that were mentioned in the Mishnah. And the question is that list complete? Levi suggests that maybe there's a 16th, namely a woman raped by the brother's father. So, who was the mother of one brother. So actually, that probably should be S apostrophe in my in that second line. So, for example, Yaakov raped Sarah, which produced Ruvain. Levi and Shimon are other sons of Yaakov, but with a different mother. So Levi actually chooses to marry both Sarah, the raped woman, and Leah, and then he dies without children. Now, this case is going to be subject to dispute. The rabbis say Sarah can marry any of Yaakov's sons who are not her son. And so as a result, there's no prohibition of doing that. And so, Jibum can apply effectively. Rabbi Yehuda, however, says, no, Sarah's not allowed to marry any of Yaakov's sons. So according to the rabbis, Sarah could be a 16th category in our Mishnah, right? Because our Mishnah tells us that Ruvain cannot marry Sarah, his mother, or Leah, her co-wife, but Shimon can perform Yibum. So that all works. Now, if Shimon does so and marries Leah and Rachel, for example, then Shimon dies without children. So Reuven cannot perform Yibum because Shimon's 2 widows are a co-wife of an erva, meaning that Leah was Sarah's co-wife. Leah was Reuven's mother's co-wife, and Rachel is the co-wife of the co-wife. So the entire Mishnah works. It is all good. It could have been listed, okay? And so according to the Rabbi Yehuda, however, Sarah is prohibited to marry any of Yaakov's sons. And however, if Levi did go ahead and marry Sarah, if Levi dies without any children, Yibum and Chalitza do not apply at all to Sarah or to any co-wives. And this is true for all the brothers, not just one, so which means that the other case, it's different from all the other cases in our Mishnah. So this means that there could never be, for example, a co-wife of a co-wife situation. And we saw that all the way back on Daf Daled. We saw this machlokas. But the point is that, Levi was suggesting that this would be part of the list. So based on the foregoing, we heard that Rebbe rejected this 16th case because it involves an argument. So that's why he decided not to participate. He said, that's why it wasn't listed. Rebbe Yehuda would disagree with the case, and we don't want to list in our Mishnah any disagreements. That is that was a big piece of what we did yesterday, the second part of yesterday. Now, we then offered 4 challenges. We went through the first 3 challenges and all three of them were rejected. And we're in the middle of the fourth challenge. We read the language of that fourth challenge, and now I want to just explain it outside, because we didn't really have a chance to explain the details. So specifically, the case deals with a brother who was, so specifically the case deals with a brother who was not alive when another brother died without children. So that was one of the cases that we listed in our Mishnah. So again, a brother who dies, who is born only after another brother dies, our Mishnah said that brother is prohibited to marry the dead brother's widow or her co-wives, i.e. Yibum never applies to him. And so there's a debate about the scope of this prohibition. The rabbis say that the prohibition applies as long as the deceased brother dies before the other brother was born. Doesn't matter how much later the other brother was born. So if Reuven and Levi are brothers, and Levi marries Leah and dies without children, Reuven, of course, he's alive, he can perform Yibum and marry Leah. If Shimon is then born, however later after, even if he was born after Reuven has married Leah and Leah has become Reuven's wife, according to the rabbis, since Shimon was born later, Shimon is never allowed to marry Leah or her co-wives. So if Reuven also dies without children, there's no Yibum for them, because Shimon was not alive when Levi passed away. And so as a result, when Levi passed away, his wife Leah became eligible for Yibum, and as long as Shimon wasn't alive then, he could never marry her, and any of her co-wives become prohibited to him. And the question you might ask is, well, why is that? Now, of course, this is Xeris Akasuf, but there's a rationale for it, because what's the whole purpose of Yibum? The whole purpose of Yibum is to enable the deceased brother's name to be established. Well, if the brother who is doing that never was alive at the time of his brother, well, it makes sense to say that he doesn't have the ability to really establish the name of his brother. He wasn't even alive at the same time. So that's the concept. But again, according to the rabbis, it doesn't matter how much later Shimon is born, but as long as Shimon wasn't born when Levi was alive, then when Levi dies, Shimon's not going to be able to marry Levi's widow or any of her co-wives. Now, Rabbi Shimon has a different approach. He narrows this prohibition and says it only applies if the new brother is born after the deceased brother dies, but before another brother performs Yibum. According to Rabbi Shimon's logic, once the Yibum has been performed, once Reuven has married Leah, Levi's widow, once that happens, Leah becomes a full wife to Reuven, and so as a result, her status as Levi's widow has effectively gone away. So there's a good logic to Rabbi Shimon's statement. Of course, the rabbis say that may be true that she's the wife, but she's still the mechanism for establishing the name of the brother. And so as a result, it would still continue to apply the prohibition. Anyway, but that's the machlokas between the rabbis and Rabbi Shimon. Now, that all is all by way of introduction to the statement that provided the question of question number 4 on Rebbe. So again, the question on Rebbe is, Rebbe, why did you reject Levi's proposal of a 16th category, namely the one of rape? And you said it was because our Mishnah does not deal with any disagreements. Well, we think that our Mishnah does deal with the disagreement, because if you look at a statement that we will see in a couple of weeks from Rabbi Chia, what does Rabbi Chia say? Rabbi Chia taught in a brisa that all the rules in our Mishnah can involve a situation where two sisters are married to two brothers who both die without children, and one sister is able to marry one remaining brother but not the other, and the other sister is able to marry another remaining brother, but not the other. So that's very complicated. So let's break it down and go through it slowly. So let's consider 4 brothers: Reuven, Levi, Shimon, and Yehuda. For simplicity, we're going to have Reuven and Levi marry the sisters Rachel and Leah. Okay, so those are 2 sisters. If Reuven and Levi die without any children, and they die before any yibum is able to happen to the other one's spouse, so then in an ordinary case, we're going to see that Shimon and Yehuda are required to do chalitza because neither of them is able to marry both women, and so as a result, they just have to do chalitza. At the same time, yibum does apply. It's not like it doesn't, but we're going to require chalitza in that situation. That's what we're going to learn later. However, if it turns out that Rachel has an erva relationship to Shimon, for example, let's say he's his mother. So how could that happen? All right, well, let's go through it. So Rachel, before she marries Reuven, she's married to Yaakov, and Yaakov's and Yaakov then has with Rachel has the son Shimon. Yaakov dies, and so Rachel now marries Reuven, and so that is how that is possible. So Shimon can't marry Rachel because that's his mother, but he can marry Leah, and so as a result, because now he is able only to, even though Rachel and Leah are sisters, since he can only marry one of them, he's allowed to do yibum with Leah. And if Leah has an erva relationship with Yehuda, for example, she's his mother, so similarly, Yehuda can marry Rachel. So, and obviously he can't marry Leah because Leah is Yehuda's mother. So Rashi goes through all 15 categories in our Mishnah to show how it's possible to have this situation of 4 brothers, 2 marry sisters, and that the remaining 2 have a relationship with that sister, with one of those sisters that is covered by our Mishnah. So it goes through all of those possibilities, and in every one of them, one of the surviving brothers, again, the surviving brothers are Shimon and Yehuda. One of the surviving brothers is able to marry one of the 2 sisters and not the other, and the other brother is able to marry one of the 2 sisters and not the other. So the Gemara notes 3 different opinions about the scope of the meaning of all when the Baraisa refers to our Mishnah. Rav Yehuda says it applies just to the last cases in our Mishnah, but not the first cases. Abaye says it applies to all cases in the Mishnah, except the case of one's non-contemporary brother. And Rav Safra says, no, it applies even in the case of a non-contemporary brother. Now, all of that is to set up the question again, according to Rebbe. The question for Rebbe is, Rebbe says that there's no machlokus in our Mishnah. But when we apply Rebbe Chia's statement that there could be 4 brothers, 2 of them marry sisters, the 2 brothers who married sisters die, and it could be a case of one brother is capable of marrying one of the 2 sisters and not the other, and the other brother is capable of marrying one of the 2 sisters and not the other. All right. The problem is that the only way that we can set up that situation in the case of brothers who have in the case of brothers who did not survive at the time, who were not alive at the time of the deceased brother, the only way that we can set up that situation is only according to Rebbe Shimon. It does not work. There is no way to set that situation up according to the rabbis. Well, that means that we can't, our Mishnah has to be talking about a machlokas. It can't be talking about a case where everybody agrees. Now, we had earlier said that when it came to the case of the brother who dies before the other brother was born, that we were talking about where the other brother was born after the deceased brother died, but before Yibum was applied. And that way it applied both according to the rabbis and according to Rabbi Shimon. But now that we have Rav Safra, who says that Rabbi Chia's statement applies to every case in our Mishnah, when the only case that it could apply to with respect to the brother who is not yet born when the other brother dies is only according to Rabbi Shimon, well, now our Mishnah must be talking about a machlokas. So what is that case? Let's now go through the case of the one brother dying when the other brother is not yet alive, and how that only works according to Rabbi Shimon and not according to the rabbis. So to start that case, we actually now need 6 brothers. Okay, so stay with me. Okay, we got 6 brothers. We're going to start again with our famous 4, Reuven, Levi, Shimon, and Yehuda. I apologize for not getting them in the classic order, but I've chosen Reuven and Levi to marry Rachel and Leah, the sisters, so that just to keep the alliteration and the first letter the same. So hopefully that at least helps a little bit on this complicated case. So we're going to have, again, Reuven and Levi marry Rachel and Leah. They are sisters. Shimon and Yehuda are the surviving brothers. When one now we're going to have additional brother number 1, Yisachar, is born between the death of Reuben and the Yibum done by Shimon to Reuven's wife Rachel. Okay, so now this means that according to everybody, but even according to Rabbi Shimon, Yisachar will never be able to marry Rachel or any of her co-wives. Okay, and then between the death of Levi and the Yibum done by Yehuda to Levi's wife Leah, another brother is born. And of course, this means that according to both the rabbis and Rabbi Shimon, Zvulun will never be able to marry Leah or any of her co-wives. So now, if Shimon and Yehuda also now die without children, Yisachar and Zvulun will each only be permitted to marry one of the sisters, and only according to Rabbi Shimon. Yisachar can marry Leah, but not Rachel. Zvulun can marry Rachel, but not Leah. And this is only true for Rabbi Shimon. It's not true for the rabbis, because Zvulun was born also after the death of Reuven. And so according to the rabbis, he can't marry either Rachel or Leah, because both of those, their original husbands, Reuven and Levi, died before Zvulun's birth. And so now we've shown that the problem is that this case that Rav Safra mentions of 6 brothers only works according to Rabbi Shimon and not the rabbis, meaning that our Mishnah is dealing with disagreement. So, Rebbe, how can you use the fact that all the cases in our Mishnah don't deal with disagreement when in fact they do deal with disagreement? All right, and that brings us to our answer. So that was a very long introduction, but I hope that was all comprehensible. Happy to take any questions, but now we're ready to start with the answer, and the answer is the second word on the line. The Hagos Habach and others take out the word Ella. Rashi also doesn't have the word Ella, so we're going to just start with L'Rebbe. L'Rebbe Hani Klali Leislei. He doesn't hold of that general rule. So the answer is that Rav Safra is just one opinion, and Rebbe didn't hold of that opinion, and so as a result, that we have now confirmed that this is the first approach. The first approach is that Rebbe didn't agree with that teaching in the Brisa quoted by Rebbe Chia that applied to all 15 cases in our Mishnah. And so as a result, the reason Rebbe rejected Rabbi Levi's suggestion is because our Mishnah involves cases without any disagreement, and Levi's case is subject to dispute. And so as a result, we have explanation number 1 for Rebbe's rejection. So now the Gemara is going to go in and offer 2 other explanations for Rebbe's approach. So, approach number 2 for why Rebbe didn't like Levi's proposal. So, Rav Ada Karchina Kamei de Rav Kahana Amar Mashmei de Rava. So now again we're at the end of the second line on Yudam and Aleph, Rav Ada Rav Ada Karchina Kameda Rav Kahana Amar Mishmeda Rava La'olam Islay Rabbi Hanikali. No, you actually can say that Rabbi does agree with Rabbi Chia's rules, V'hachi Kamar, and the reason is not because of disagreement, rather Imo Anosos Avi Hachi Kamar like, and this is what he was telling Levi. Imo Anusos Aviv, when it comes to that category of a mother who was raped by the father but never married to him, it can only work with respect to one aspect of the rules of Rabbi Chia. But with respect to two of the rules, it can't apply. Meaning that when it comes to the specific case that Rebbe wanted to add, right? So that Levi wanted to add. Levi wanted to add the case of where Yaakov, the father of all four brothers of Reuven, Levi, Shimon, and Yehuda, where Yaakov raped Sarah, and Sarah was one of the mothers of one of the four brothers. So, but the problem is, let's take a look. You can't have a situation where that case is in the category of Rabbi Chia's statement of four brothers, where two of them marry sisters, and the remaining two are able to marry one but not the other. Because if Yaakov were to actually rape two sisters, so we can have a situation where, again, so he raped two sisters. We'll call them Chana and Penina. And now Chana and Penina marry Reuven and Levi. And now Reuven and Levi die without any children. But Chana's child, Shimon, and Penina's child, Yehuda, they are the people that are left, but they're not going to be able to marry anyone. So, okay, let's go through. Consider four brothers. Again, we've got Reuven, Levi, Shimon, Yehuda. Reuven is the son of Yaakov's rape of Chana, while Levi is the son of, I changed the name. So let's go with the ones that are on the screen. So Reuven is the son of Yaakov's rape of Chana, while Levi is the son of Yaakov's rape of Penina. Chana then marries Shimon, and Penina marries Yehuda. So when Shimon and Yehuda die without children, Reuven and Levi are not able to marry either Chana or Penina. Reuven can't marry Chana because she's his mother, and he can't marry Penina because she's his mother's sister. Similarly, Levi can't marry Penina because she's his mother, and he can't marry Chana because she's his mother's sister. So if Chana and Penina are sisters, there is no way to structure the relation such that Reuven and Levi could each marry one of them. Thus, while the part of Rabbi Chia's statement that we are talking about two sisters who are each a Yevamot is true, it isn't true that one is forbidden to this brother is permitted to the other, as they're both prohibited to both brothers, right? So Rabbi Chia's statement was two parts. It says, Rabbi Chia's statement had two parts. So let's go back to Rabbi Chia's statement so that we can see it in full. Rabbi Chia's statement was that that the one who's prohibited to this one is permitted to the other brother. The one who's forbidden to that brother is permitted to that brother. And it's talking about sisters. So we can have a case where Yaakov rapes two women and their sisters, and the sisters come down. But you won't have the piece of Rabbi Chia's statement for being forbidden to one and permitted to the other. And if Yaakov were to have raped two women and they weren't sisters, well then you can in fact find how the four brothers, you can have the two remaining brothers one could be permitted to marry one of the women, and the other could be permitted to marry the other woman. But by definition, if they're not, if the women themselves are not sisters, you're not fulfilling the second part of Rebbe Chia's statement. So as a result, the issue that Rebbe had with Levi's proposal was simply that proposal was inconsistent with Rebbe Chia's statement. So again, that's approach number two. So again, the reason that Rebbe rejected Levi's suggestion is because Rebbe Chia's statement applies to every case in our Mishnah, but it couldn't apply to this one. So that's explanation number two for the rejection. And now we're ready for explanation number three. Again, these are all explanations for why Rebbe rejected the case of Yaakov raping one of the wives, and then coming back, and then that wife, those wives coming down, raping two sisters, and the case that Rebbe's rejecting is Levi's suggestion that we're dealing with, that another erva that could be listed in our Mishnah is where Yaakov, the father of the brothers, rapes the mother of one of them, and according to, and the reason is because either it's dealing with a case of machlokes, or it's dealing with a case, it's dealing with a case of machlokes, or we apply Rebbe Chia's statement, and Rebbe Chia's statement can't apply to that case. So those are two explanations. So now, explanation number three for why Rebbe might have objected. Rav Ashi Amar la'olam leis leila Rebbe hani klali. No, really, Rebbe doesn't agree with the klalim that Rebbe Chia taught. And it could, and even our Mishnah could talk about machlokas. Umay kemeduma ani she'ein lo moach b'kad kado de k'amarlai. And what does it mean when Rebbe says that it seems to him that Levi doesn't have any brain in his head? This is what he's saying. My time lo dayakta masnisin de masnisin Rebbe Yehudahi. 1 second. You should have figured out that our Mishnah is really according to Rebbe Yehuda. All right, and we'll explain how we. So how does we know that? How does he know that? And he's somebody who forbids a marriage to somebody who was violated by his father. As we said in the introduction, I'm going to go back, scroll up the screen, right? We had the machlokas between the rabbis and Rebbe Yehuda. The rabbis say that Sarah, who was raped by Yaakov, can marry any of Yaakov's sons who are not her son, right? Because there's no prohibition. Rebbe Yehuda says, no, Sarah may not marry any of Yaakov's sons. So if she can't marry any of Yaakov's sons, the whole situation in our Mishnah doesn't apply, meaning that there's no opportunity to have, for example, a co-wife of a co-wife. So it doesn't make any sense. And so Rebbe was upset with Levi that he didn't figure that out. Now, how do we know that our Mishnah is dealing with, is according to the opinion of Rebbe Yehuda? Well, our Mishnah must be according to the opinion of Rebbe Yehuda, the Ketani, because we learned in a Mishnah that we're going to come on in 3 days, Sheish Arayos Chamuros Mehelu, that in fact it's a continuation of our Mishnah that says that there are 6 arayos that are even more strict than the 15 that we had in our Mishnah. Why? Because these additional 6 cannot marry any of the brothers. They can only marry people who are not related to the paternal sons of the paternal brothers of the deceased man. Saroseim mutaros. And so as a result, their co-wives are always permitted. We're going to see that for these 6 relations, with one possible exception, that the institution of marriage does not even apply in these cases. So if one brother were to marry one of these 6 relations, let's deal with the simplest one, right? A brother marries his father's wife, who doesn't happen to be his mom. It could be a mom for somebody else, or it could be a mom of nobody, but it was somebody who his father married. One is not allowed to ever marry one's father's wife. So now, if he's married to other women at the same time, and he dies without children, so then the other brothers are able to do yibum with any of the other wives that this person had, because the marriage to his father's wife does not take effect. And so as a result, that's okay. So therefore that's okay. All right. So and what are the categories that we're going to learn in that Mishnah? Imo, the Ashes Aviv, Bachos Aviv, and then it goes on with dealing with other categories. But what's the first category? My Imo, what's the category of the mother? So Elam and the Suas Aviv, if you say that the mother was married to the father, well then Hainu Ashes Aviv. Then it's the father's wife. There's no difference in the case. Elalav Anusas Aviv. It must be that first case in the next Mishnah is dealing with somebody who was raped by the father. So and if that's true, the Katani, Bibnei Shehain, Nesuas Lacherim, and yet we say that these people must marry somebody else. They're not allowed to marry any of the other brothers, even the brothers who are not this woman's son. So she's not allowed to marry any of the brothers because she had relations with the father. Well, if that's true, Lacherin in, La'achin lo, they're allowed to marry other people, but not the brothers. So man shamat le de islay high svara. Who is it that says this? Who's the opinion that says that a raped woman is not allowed to marry any of the raper's sons? That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda. Da asar ba'anusas aviv. He says that all of a man's sons are not allowed to marry the woman that was raped by him. Mishum haki lo tanile. And so that's why our Mishnah shouldn't have listed this case. So now we're going to question Rav Ashi's approach, but none of those questions are going to stand. And now we can understand we've got three explanations for why Rebbe rejected Levi's suggestion. So Amarle Ravin lo Rav Ashi, Rebbe Yehuda Nami Mishkach. So 1 second, you can find a case where a father rapes a woman, and there is actually a possibility to do chalitza in your ibum because if in fact the one of the brothers actually went ahead and married her, that would be a case where you could have that. So the Rav Ashi, the explanation, the question, Rav Ashi would respond, De'i lo katani. No, we're not learning any cases of maybe the somebody where, if somebody did something that was prohibited. So Amrle Rav Ashi, the Rav Kahana, below the Inami Mishkach, you can even find a case where there was no violation of who one of the brothers married. Why? Yaakov Anas Kalato. If Yaakov were to rape his daughter-in-law, and then the son who was married to that daughter-in-law dies without any children, the holy Mimena Ben, and of course she has a child as a result of that rape. Umeis Ruvain below Banim, and now Ruvain dies without any children. Nafla Kamei Bara, so she can actually become a yibum possibility for her son. So Migu Deihu Asira Tsarasa Nami Asira, and we would say that since she's forbidden to that son, let's call him. We'll call him Shimon. So Yaakov rapes Reuven's wife, Rachel's son Shimon. Reuven now dies. Reuven has more than one wife. So now, remarkably, we end up with Reuven having Reuven's wives having the possibility to do yibum with Yaakov's son Shimon, who is also the son of one of Reuven's wives. And so that son obviously can't marry his mother, can't marry Rachel, but he could do yibum for any of the other wives. So as a result, the rules in our first Mishnah would apply, and that the rule of not being able to marry any co-wives as a result of having the relationship of being the son of the raped woman could actually apply in our Mishnah. So Amar Lei, the explanation that Rav Kahana offers is no, but Achlasa the Hetera Kamairi. We're talking about situations of a permitted nature where all the people are permitted. But Achlasa the Asura Lo Kamairi. We're not talking about a situation where any of the brothers is prohibited. So we're dealing only with cases in which the deceased brother and the surviving Yavam were themselves born through permitted unions, not with cases in which one of them was conceived through a prohibited union. So the point is that as a result, we're not dealing with that kind of case. So we've come up with, again, 3 explanations for Rebbe's rejection of Levi. So V'afal Pikein, now remarkably, even though his reasoning was rejected, Levi actually is going to incorporate in his set of Brisas his teaching. V'afal Pikein Badka Levi b'masdisi. He actually included this case in his case. The Tani Levi, because we got a Brisa as follows: Imo, one's mother, Pamim Poteris Sarasa. Sometimes she exempts her co-wife. Upamim Einu Poteris Sarasa. Sometimes she does not exempt her co-wife. Ketzat. Haisa Ima Nesuas Aviv. If the mother was actually married to the father, Venisis La'achiv Miaviv Umeis, and now she quote unquote marries one of her son's paternal brothers, and now that brother dies without children. Zohi Imo She'ein Poteris Sarasa. This is a mother who does not exempt her co-wife. Why? Because the status of marriage does not apply to this woman. As we mentioned, if a father is married to a woman and has a son with her, and now one of the husband's other sons, who is not from this woman, marries her because the father gets divorced or whatever, or the father dies, and now the son marries that woman, that is not a marriage that's permitted, because the Torah prohibits any son to marry any father's wife. You can't marry any of the wives of your father. And so as a result, the whole institution of marriage doesn't apply to that woman. And so as a result, any of the remaining wives of that brother are able to do yibum with the other brothers if that brother were to die without children. And so now we continue to Yudam Bet. And what's the second case? Haisa Imo Anusas Aviv. If in fact the mother's was never married to the father, but was just violated, and now she marries one of her son's brothers, one of her son's paternal brothers, and now who then dies without children. Zohi Imo Shipotera Sarasa. She does exempt all of her co-wives. And even though our Mishnah says that there are only 15 cases, we can actually add case number 16, such as this one. And so as a result, we see that there's in fact 16 cases according to Levi. Now, again, there's a reason that we could ignore this case because even according to even according to Levi, there really shouldn't be any co-wives of co-wives situations. But okay, let's go on. All right, so Amar le Reish Lakish l'Rebbe Yochanan. So now Reish Lakish is going to ask Rabbi Yochanan, maybe we could have come up with a remarkable 17th case. Once we're dealing with a case where a brother, where we're dealing with a case of De'i, where a case that in our Mishnah that involves an unlawfully married woman, then L'Levi, so Amar Le Reish Lakish L'Rebbe Yochanan, L'Levi, the Amar De'i, Nami Katani, we could actually learn another case. L'Levi de Amar De'i Nami Katani, that according to Levi, who says that we also learn cases in our Mishnah where the marriage is unlawful. So lisne, we can learn another case. Hacholef liyivimto b'chazar v'kitsha. What about a case where a man, we'll start with just a simple case of Reuven, Levi, and Shimon. Reuven marries Rachel. Reuven dies without any children. Levi now marries Rachel, and Levi now performs chalitzo with Rachel, and then chazar v'kitsha, and now he goes back and he marries her. Well, that's not allowed. You're not allowed to do that. Once you perform chalitza, she becomes prohibited to all the brothers. So umeis below banim, and now Reuven dies without any. Now Levi also dies without any children, and he was married to Rachel. So again, Reuven married Rachel. Reuven dies without children. Levi, his brother, does chalitza, but then he turns around and marries her anyway. So, and now Levi dies without any children. So now Rachel falls to Shimon. Demigu deihi asura tsarasa nami asura. So because she's prohibited, so not only is she prohibited to Shimon, to marry Shimon, but any other wife of Levi is also prohibited to Shimon. So if Levi had married both Rachel and Leah, who are now not sisters, we'll say that they're not sisters. So Rachel and Leah. So Shimon, who's the surviving brother, is not allowed to marry Rachel because Rachel was a chalitza, and so he can't marry her, and because a chalitza is forbidden to all the brothers, and because she's forbidden to all the brothers, he also can't marry Leah because Leah is Rachel's co-wife. So why didn't, once we're talking about improper relations, so we could list this case as well in our Mishnah. So Amar Le, Rabbi Yochanan replies, Lefisha Eina b'tzara tzara, because in that case there will never be a co-wife of a co-wife, and our Mishnah talks about co-wives of co-wife. Now, why won't there be a co-wife of a co-wife? Because there's the prohibition of marrying her is a kares prohibition, and therefore all of the co-wives are forbidden to all of the brothers. There's not a situation where one brother, as in all the other situations in our Mishnah, where one brother is able to marry one of the remaining co-wives. So as a result, there will never be a co-wife of a co-wife because all the brothers are all forbidden to marry this woman who had the chalitza done with her. So now the question is, we're going to have a debate between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish says that the other brothers are subject to kares if they marry the chalitza woman, and similarly, the other brothers' co-wives are subject to kares for all the brothers. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan is going to say that the other brothers are only subject to a lav if they marry her. So similarly, the other brothers' co-wives are also only subject to a lav if they marry a woman who has chalitza. So we're going to have that debate. So why didn't, and we'll get to that debate and we'll deal with it in more detail in a moment, but now we're asking on Rabbi Yochanan, why did he use this as the response to Reish Lakish? He could have just said that there is a negative commandment to marry them, and therefore v'chayavin lavin b'nei chalitza v'yibum ninhu, and those women who are prohibited by a mere negative commandment do have the eligibility of doing chalitza or yibum, and in fact we generally say that they have to do chalitza. So it was because Rabbi Yochanan was giving an answer according to Reish Lakish's own opinion. For me, they're all chayvim lavim, and therefore it doesn't apply. And for me, they do have the rules of chalitza and yibum, and so as a result, there is no strict prohibition, and as a result, there is no prohibition of the co-wives as a result of the of Levi now marrying Rachel. When Levi marries Rachel, to whom he had done chalitza, and now he goes and marries her anyway after Reuven dies without children. So because that's a valid marriage, all the other wives are able to do yibum according to Rabbi Yochanan. But according to Reish Lakish, where there's a prohibition of kares, that's the problem. For you, they are chayv kares, and lefisha einem b'tzara tzara. But even for you, there's no co-wife of co-wife situation because all the brothers share an equal prohibition, and so that is why we didn't list it in the Mishnah. So Itmar. So now let's go and give that dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, and with that we'll be done for the day, because we're going to then challenge each opinion, and we'll show that each opinion can survive, although we'll be continuing more challenges tomorrow. So Itmar, hacholetz livim tov v'chazer v'kitcha. If somebody performs chalitza with Yevamot, meaning that Reuven's wife, Reuven married Rachel, and Reuven dies without children. So now Levi, his brother, performs. It can do yibum with Rachel, or he can do chalitza with Rachel. Well, if he chooses to do chalitza, and now he marries her anyway, what's the law? So Reish Lakish, who ein chayav al hachalutza kares. He is not chayav kares for taking this woman. He's only chayav alav. But if any of the brothers were to marry her, chayav al hachalutza kares, then they are chayav kares for the chalutza. Why? Because according to Reish Lakish, we'll see that basically a brother's wife, if they did have children, is you're not allowed to marry her with the punishment of kares. If you marry her, you get kares. So as a result, what Reish Lakish is saying is if in fact the person were to die without children, so now the possibility of yibum exists. So as long as that possibility exists, so now there's no prohibition of kares. But as soon as the prohibition goes back on her, she goes back to being a prohibition of kares. All right. And al hatzara, when it comes to the chalutza's co-wives, so bein hu uvein ha'achim chayavim al hatzara kares. You're chayav kares with respect to any of those co-wives. But Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yochanan says, bein hu uvein achim ein chayavim al chalutza kares v'lo al hatzara kares. Rabbi Yochanan takes a different approach. He says that once the kares prohibition goes away, it goes away for everyone. And once we have the possibility of doing yibum, if in fact chalitza is done, the prohibition of remarriage is always just a lav. It is not a penalty of kares. Okay? So now why? Why do they understand? So let's go through. So again, everybody agrees that for the brother who performs chalitza, the prohibition to now marry the chalitza woman is only a lav, not subject to kares. However, for the other brothers, Reish Lakish says that the other brothers are subject to kares if they marry her, just as they would be subject to kares if they marry any brother's wife. So similarly, the original brothers' co-wives are subject to kares for all the brothers because they're all former wives of their deceased brother. And so former wives have a general rule of being subject to kares. Rabbi Yochanan says no. The other brothers are also only subject to a lav if they marry either the woman who had chalitza done to her, or the other brothers' co-wives are also subject to a lav because were all potential yibum candidates. And because they were all potential yibum candidates, they are all only subject to a lav. So now we're going to give the reasoning. So my time of the Reish Lakish, Amar Kra Asher Lo Yivneh. It's the brother who did not build. The chalitza is because he didn't want to build. So Kavan Shelo Bana Shuv Lo Yivneh. We have a concept of because that brother didn't want to build his brother's house, So as a result, he's never going to be allowed to build his brother's house. And that is just a lav. So below Yivna. It's only that brother who did chalitza who's subject to the negative commandment of not building. About Echav, kaimi. But the other brothers who didn't do chalitza, they remain subject to the prohibition, to the general prohibition of marrying a brother's wife. And so they are just like they were prohibited before with the punishment of kares, so too now they're prohibited with the punishment of kares, meaning if the brother had divorced his wife rather than dying without children, none of the brothers could have married any of these women. And so as a result, they are all subject to the kares penalty. The Allah dida hudakai below Yivna. And as for her, right, the chalutza herself, she's that he's subject to the fact that she can't build. Hatsara de kaimi. All the co-wives are just like they were. So again, while the wife to whom chalitza is done is subject to only a lav with respect to the brother who did chalitza, with respect to all the brothers, even the brother who did chalitza, all the other wives to whom Yibum and Chalitza were not done, they all go back to being a brother's wife, and so they are all subject to kares. Rabbi Yochanan, however, disagrees. Could it be possible, he asks, we had a situation where originally when the brother died, he could have done chalitza with this woman or that woman. And any of the brothers could have done it. So it could have been, the chalitza could have been done by any of the brothers, and the chalitza could have been done to any of the widows. And now, because this brother and that woman, they did the chalitza, everybody else goes back to kares? That can't be. Ella, ihu shlichusa de achim ka'avid. Rather, he is the shliach of all the brothers, meaning the brother who does chalitza, it's as if he's acting on behalf of all of the brothers. And when it comes to her, shlichusa de tzara ka'avda, and she's like the shliach of all the other women. And so as a result, that is why it all makes sense. And so as a result, we're going to stop here and we're going to pick up tomorrow with the remaining cases and deal with why it is that with challenges that Rish Lakish is going to face, starting with Rabbi Yochanan, and they're going to go back and forth, challenging each other and challenging the situation. So again, the Rish Lakish says that the only exception to the kares rule is the brother who does chalitza and the one co-wife to whom chalitza is done. Those are the only two people to whom a lav applies, whereas everybody else is subject to kares. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it's a lav to everybody. Now, again, remember the principle that I mentioned earlier. If someone marries a woman where the relationship is subject to the penalty of kares, the Torah views the relationship. This is a note after number 4 and on the screen. The Torah views the relationship as null and void. As a result, if the man dies without children, even if the prohibited woman is also prohibited to the remaining brothers, the other brothers can do yibum, and they can do chalitza with the deceased brother's other wives. In other words, the prohibition of co-wives will not apply. Okay. However, if the prohibition is only subject to lashes, if it's only a lav, then the marriage does have legal effect, and the prohibition of co-wives would apply. And so that's how we can see that there's a difference, a very important difference between Rish Lakish's view and Rabbi Yochanan's view. According to Rabbi Yochanan, because all the brothers are only subject to a lav, the whole prohibition of co-wives could apply. But whereas to Rish Lakish, the only situation where the co-wives wouldn't apply is in the situation of where the brother who did chalitza goes and remarries her. That's the only situation according to Reish Lakish. And again, the reason that none of those situations are listed in our Mishnah is because all of those situations, they may have a co-wife, according to Rabbi Yochanan, there might be a co-wife prohibition, but there will never be a co-wife of co-wife prohibition. Why? Because the co-wife prohibition applies to all the remaining brothers. So none of the brothers have the ability to do yibum with her. And so as a result, it will never be a co-wife of co-wife situation. And so that is why our Mishnah didn't mention that situation. So, okay, so that reviews and explains why there isn't a potential 17th case for our Mishnah. And again, we'll talk about the Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan will debate further their machlokas about whether it's a lav or a kares prohibition, God willing, tomorrow.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right, and we'll
Have a
return
good day.
to our regular bat time, regular bat channel.
You got it. I'll see you
All
then.
right. See you then. Bye-bye.